Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about Women's Day. Perhaps say a few words about legislative issues. We currently have the Great Reform Bill before the Parliament at Westminster. It may be as well to remind ourselves that in 1832, the previous Great Reform Bill was the bill which removed the right of women to vote. Now, the electorate in those days was very small. It was a property qualification, but women who met the property qualification and who were not married or were head of household could then vote. That danger exists with the Great Reform Bill today, as it takes away rights and equalities for a wide range of people, potentially. 1893 was an important year in legislative terms. Firstly, in New Zealand, which was the first jurisdiction in the world to allow equal voting for men and women, leading the way. In the UK, things were making some progress, but not very much, with the passage of the Married Women's Property Act, the fifth such act since 1870, which for the first time allowed women to actually own, in their own right, property, rather than it being the property of their husbands. 1917, and in particular tomorrow, 100 years ago, was a strike and a protest by the women of Russia, on the bread and peace strike and protest, which led only 4 days later to the fall of the Tsar, the White Russian Revolution, which later in the year, of course, led to the Red Russian Revolution. So women have influenced politics for a long time. The Cabinet Secretary referred to Ban Ki-moon. Well, the United Nations Charter, which was adopted in 1945, was the first international agreement that included within it the fundamental principle of equality between men and women. So the United Nations are to be commended for their early action on this subject. Now, the 1st of January 1975 was the day that the Equal Pay Act came into operation. My wife rejoiced because that was the first time in her career she was able to enter her company's pension plan, right to the point of her retirement. The problem of her entering that plan late affected her pension. It's some 20% lower than it might have been. So even in 1975, something that happened then continues to have effects to this day. My wife, who worked in the finance industry, was pretty much on her own. There was one other woman at a senior level. She specialised in investment trusts. She used to go to the Association of Investment Trust annual dinners. She was one of only 2 women who used to go to the 300 or 400 people who went to that dinner. She was very fortunate that Joe Gormley, the General Secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers, who was one of the biggest investors as the chair of the pension fund for the miners, insisted that my wife always sat next to her, and he always bought the drink. He was a sexist, but sometimes it worked in some people's favours. My wife also, and I'm slightly surprised, we're saying no serious business people. My wife also was a mentor to Audrey Baxter, who's the executive chairman of Baxter's Foods. So there are, exceptionally, some women at senior levels in some businesses in Scotland. Now, in a personal level, I point to my aunt, Daisy, who was one of those who worked in a munitions factory in the First World War. In doing so, she lost one of her fingers in an industrial accident. She was one of very many. My mother, when she first voted, had 2 votes, curiously enough, because she was a university graduate, and you got an additional vote then. But there are some female heroes it's worth having a wee think about. My professional career, starting in the 1960s, was in computers. And Ada Lovelace, who was Charles Babbage's programmer in the 1860s and 70s, was the person who invented, look it up, algorithmic approach to programming, which underpins the way we do things today. And Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, who programmed the Mark I computer in 1944 in the United States, was the real founder of the way that we do programming this day, and it was her bug, that's the American word for a moth, that we carry as a word for an error in a computer programme to this day. Marie Curie, tomorrow is Daffodil Day. We have a stand in the Parliament here from the Marie Curie nurses. She was the first and only person to have won 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific disciplines. Isn't that a hero to aspire to? An example of how things were not so good. Steve Shirley, who was the founder and chief executive of a consultancy company called FI in the 1970s. Steve, you would think, is a man's name. She intended that you think it was a man's name. She was actually Stephanie. But she used the word Steve so that until she appeared up, eventually before her prospects, they didn't even know she was a woman. Very successful she was indeed. And today, climate justice, a real woman's issue. Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, leading the way in making sure that we do the right things. Now, fairness for women in no way diminishes men. Rather, it rewards all of us in society, because equality for all is a necessary prerequisite to fairness for all.